Hello, back to live action. All right. So this is going to be follow-up video from a little while back, and it's going to continue on talking about our multi-line, multi-row variable set and how we can interact with that in Flow Designer. So we had a question on one of the first two videos, and the question was how do we interact with our multi-line variable data inside of Flow Designer? And there's a couple pieces to that, and we're going to talk about those in this little block here. Should probably take us about 15-20 minutes to get through it, and then we'll wrap this up for the live stream, and then we'll go from there. But yeah, so it was a great question, and the person's the comment was Samik. Hope I said that correctly. And they were just wondering how in our email can we apply our row variable data into that email that we're going to send out. Now, the first thing we need to understand is how do we get access to our row data within Flow Designer, right? So let's hop over to Flow Designer and cam bottom right. And let's take a look at our flow first, right? So this is a flow that we used in the previous stream where we are adding some team member roles, like a financial approver, a change approver, etc. And this is that same flow that we used in the first two parts of this for this video. And what we wanted to do, based on his suggestion, was their suggestion was add this row data to the variable that's going out to potentially the user, the caller, the person that requested it. Maybe it's going out to a default mailing list, whatever that is, right? So that was the question, was how do we get this row data into the body of our email? All right, so to do that, we have to know how this comes back into our back to our flow in Flow Designer, right? So on the front end, the data looks like this, right? We got row data, looks pretty straight, like an Excel sheet, right? And when this gets passed back to Flow Designer, after we do our get variables, right? If we look at this step, in this particular one, we only have one variable set. That's this variable set here, and that's what we created in the first video. If you didn't see how we did that, make sure you go back and check out part 1 and part 2 of how we got this far. But we did our get catalog items, get our variables. We selected the variables for this catalog item, and once those are available, you can see on our right side here that this comes back as an array object, right? So it's essentially coming back as an object inside of Flow Designer. So if we did any type of logging, or we went through and just log that content in our logs, we would probably see object. We wouldn't be able to see it right away. We'd have to do some manipulation, maybe using JSON.stringify in the log and pass that this variable into it. Then we could see what the structure looks like. And that'd be one thing I would suggest learning how to do too, is in your logs and your flows, you can write log statements in your flows. You can do stuff in your scripts. And all of those are, you can use your typical debugging tools, gs.log, log if you're not in a scoped app, or gs.info. If you're in a scoped app is usually what I go to. But that being said, we can now see that this is an object that's got passed back to our flow, right? So now that we know that's an object, we can start applying some of our scripting knowledge and our script, what we know about how we treat and work with objects inside of, in ServiceNow. So we can look up, how do we manipulate objects? How do we get data out of objects? How do we read objects? And, uh, you know, for us, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to write some code that's going to iterate over this object, right? And what I've decided to do um, is create a custom action, right? So I've created a custom action for this particular example that's going to essentially give us the ability to pass this object back. And then in our custom action, we're going to be able to parse this object out, get the information that we need, and then in our action, we actually move the email step into our action, right? And we're going to go through that here in a couple seconds. But it's imperative that we know and we understand what type of object we're dealing with. That way, when we're inside of our flow and we're inside of our custom action, we know how to get the data that we need out of it, right? All right, so let's hop over to our action. I have this new action here. And if you notice right off the get here, let's start with the inputs. This is very important to know, especially in Flow Designer. You have to know if you're doing your custom actions or you're doing subflows. You're making a subflow that runs off of this out of this flow. You have to understand how these get passed back and forth and how these all interact together. So in this action, I've decided that I needed an input. So I've created one input called cust object or custom object. And if you noticed, I matched up my type to match the type that I have over in my flow. Right? Array object, array object. So now what that means is when my flow runs and I call this action is expecting that I pass this back, and I'm going to make it mandatory now, but it wasn't mandatory, but it is now. So save that. But my action expects this input. So that means that we have to pass the object that we want to parse in this example, right? So this, we could have many inputs. We could have, various things that we want for our inputs. It could be user IDs. It could be anything we want to use to parse back here, but it has to come in as an input. So we know in this case, this is going to essentially be the data that we want to house in our email body, right? And this is going to be really a crude example of how to do it, but ultimately it's the same thing. In this particular case, it's going to be just a table. There's no lines. There's no nothing. It's just plain Jane table. If you want to go down the path of knowing more, making stuff look like this, you can go through and get all the CSS you need, and you can append it to what we're going to show you today. And you can go from there to take it as far as you want. I do have some examples that I could share from work, but I don't have those readily available or scrubbed to show it on this channel. But I do have a really good example of doing a fully CSS floats, kind of like scorecards for getting numbers out of our incidents, problems, changes, and service requests. That kind of goes out for an overview of the week. So it's pretty cool. I could probably bring up some of those examples and show us how I did that in a different video. But yeah, so here, first things first, we got our custom object coming in. And then now this is the hardest part of this process. The hardest part of this process is getting our data from this object, right? So think like this. When I was going through this process in my head, it's very similar to when we do a glide query, right? We do a glide query in ServiceNow. We do our for, right? We do a for or a while, right? So we do our glide query. We do a hit query, and then we say while our glide record dot next, we get values, right? So it's kind of the same premise, right? But we're going to use traditional, JavaScript, and we're going to just write a simple for loop. And in this for loop, we're going to iterate over our object. And then once we have that information, we can kind of append together. And this is a real basic, cram it in, how to do it. There are some other ways that you could do this with regards to getting this data into a template and things like that. But for ease of use of how to just get the data, sticking to one of the main questions that we had brought up by, in one of the last videos, here's the meat and potatoes of it, right? So we're going to come down to our script step, and so what we notice here is very similar. I was doing some. Remember, I told you at the beginning that if we were parsing or logging our array object, if we didn't stringify it, we wouldn't be able to see what that data type looked like. It would just say object to object in our logs, right? So in our testing, I was just did gs.log, inputs are, and this just stringified the input variable that I created here, right? This is a good step to realize too. So you have your inputs, which we created here. And then when we come to our script step, we have to have input variables for our script step, right? So what I did was I created a new variable in my script step called email body, and I made that equal to my input steps. So we know this is our custom object that we sent back over from the flow. So at this point right here, we have an object that we've assigned to email body, right? So now in our script step, we get inputs and outputs, right? So here what I did, I said content, right? Inputs dot email body, right? So now in my script step, I have whatever this value is. Now I can start manipulating it, right? So what I do here, right? So in line 5 here, I just started building a basic table using traditional CSS and inline styles. I am sure there's a way that we could attach or do a full CSS style sheet in here. But again, for this example, keeping it simple and just doing a lot of just inline basic setup for the table, right? So one thing to remember is we're building out essentially the HTML piece or the HTML template for what we want to insert to our email body, right? So I have a variable called body, which kind of just sets the parameter for the table. Then I have data, which I set to empty. And I have content, which I don't think I used. I don't think we need this one. Yeah, we don't need this one. Get rid of you. And then I have an ending HTML block where I just close off the table, right? So I start my table, I got my row, I got my headers, right? Let's make sure that looks right, right? So if we look at our table, we got table, row, header, table row, table column, right? So we just mimic that in ServiceNow. We got the table, we got a row, we got a header, right? Header, across the board, and we set up the first row and header for our table, right? I set up the ending for our table, and we'll look at this later on. But here's where things get interesting. Here's where you can start building out now and using the data that we have in our custom object to build out the body of our email, right? So let's look at our for loop. Traditional for loop, right? Var I equals 0. I is less than inputs, right? Remember, we have inputs in our script step. That email body, which is our variable from up here, all right, which we know is our custom object, dot length, and then iterate I++, right? So what this is telling us to do is very much like we see in a glide record. When we say go out and get this record or get these records, I want to know about all the records that you found that meet this criteria. Well, in this case, we're just using a for loop instead, and we're looping in and looping over essentially our multi-row variable set. Right? So now in our for loop, we're going to set some variables, fname, last name, action, and role. And we know that when we looked at our variable set, right? If we come back here and we look at, let's see, let's go here. Let's do a little configure item. And if we come down, we see our variable set, right? So if we look at our variable set, this is going to help us know what our column names are when we're looking at these back in our flow, right? So if you notice, I have inputs.emailBody, which is up here from our input variable again, dot first name, first underscore name. Now if you look back at our variable set, look at that, first underscore name. It matches up with what we want in our for loop. Last underscore name matches with what we want in our for loop. Email address, company, choose a role. These are all the names that we want to use in our for loop as we're looping through it to get the information for that current row, right? So imagine this, right? The first time through this will be row 0 or row 1, depending how you want to call it. And this is going to be Steve Smith, add financial approver. Next time through, Sarah Connor, action would be add, choose a role, change approver. So each time that we loop through this for loop is going to give us the current row value for each of these items. And if you remember in line 6, we called var data equals empty just to get it declared. And then down here, we're doing some magic that is essentially going to build out each row for our table, right? So what we do here is we say data plus equals. So it's a little shortcut. So it's going to say whatever data currently is plus this new information. Each time it goes through the for loop, it's just going to append it, and append it, right? So ultimately, if we had 3 lines or 3 names entered in our list, we should have 3 lines of row data entered into our array, right? So each time through, we should get a new first name, new last name, new action, and whatever the role is, right? So down here, we're going to start building out those rows based off of what we find up here in our for loop. Okay. So we iterate over our multi-row variable data set, build out the CSS that we want to put into the email. And here's the final piece. I just did another log, but here's the final piece. Remember, you have outputs. So I created an output variable called output HTML. And at this point, I just need to take outputs.output HTML equals body, which is our first item into our table, plus data, which we just created in the for loop, plus our ending tag for the table tag for our table in our HTML that we're going to put into the email. Okay. Do that. Make sure our types match up. We're outputting HTML. And then we come into our email step, right? So now we have our data collected in our script step. We're outputting it to HTML. This is a big reminder. Make sure you output it to HTML. Then go to email step. And at this point, if you had some other inputs, if you captured the email address, maybe you have an email address up here in the input. Maybe you had the CC person or whatever other variables you wanted to use in this email step. Make sure you capture them from the flow. If it's a variable in your catalog item, get it from there, but you got to pass it back to the action and make sure you have a input variable on your action that you can capture it with. Okay. So at this point, I just did new email step using the plus sign, clicked email. And I don't need a target record for this one. I just put in the test user email address just for examples. Put in a subject. I put in the word recap. And then using the pills from the right, I'm taking the output from my script step and placing it in the body of my email. And that is pretty much it. So let's see what it looks like. Save that. And we'll do a brand new one from scratch so everybody can see the outcome here. All right, so we're going to come back over here. Go to try it. And we'll add a couple test users. And this is going to be Michael Jordan, mj@thegoat.com. He works for Acme Corporation. He's a financial approver. Add. And then we're going to add, oh, let's see, who else should we add? Let's do Sarah Connor. Let's see at skylabs.com. She works for Acer. Change approver. Actually, add. Okay. Let's add one more just to, and this one's going to be Bill Jones at test1.test2.com. And they also work for Acer as a financial approver. Add, and that's hit order. Okay, let's see how we did over here. We got our 3 in our set here. Let's see if we got some users created. There we go. We got Bill. Yep, we got our 2 created. Let's look at our email log here. Here's our one we just created just now. Let's preview the email. Look at that. So now we have our flow data. Now I have an issue going on here somewhere in my flow where I'm running through it a couple times, but as you can see, we've got first name, last name, role, Michael Jordan, financial approver, Michael, Sarah Connor, Bill Jones, all in the email, formatted just like we do, like we were trying to get this data out of our line variable. Pretty cool. So let's see what's causing us to get, what's it doing here? Probably something to do with our plus equal here. Data's empty. I don't see why. Let's see here. Let's look at our log to see what we got for data. Let's see. What did we get here? Here are their inputs. Here's data. Yeah, I wonder why it is going through twice. Probably have something wrong in my for loop. Yeah, we could figure that out. But it's the same premise going in and out of to get your array object from flow back to the action, iterate through it, take that data, dump it out to HTML, and email it out. But I really would like to figure out why. Let's take this out. See what that does. Maybe I'm trying to be too fancy. Let's see here. Let's do another one here. Let's do two. We'll do it quick. Actually, let's do this. Let's go here. All right, let's do these real quick. Snowflake. And order. All right, let's see what we got this time. It's going to go the wrong place. Now, let's see. How do we do? Do we do better? Ah, there we go. See? Look at that. Perfect. Perfect. There we go. Mick, there you go. There it is. Perfect. Again, you could go through and add the CSS that you want here, but this is a great example of how you can get your multi-role variable set data in the flow, into an action, out to an email. And there you go. That should be it. That should be perfect. I appreciate the question. I appreciate the comment. I appreciate your patience while I was away doing some IRL stuff. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. By all means, leave another response or comment if you have still questions on it, we can go over it again. But yeah, there you go, guys. That's how you do it. Let's do a quick recap. How do you get your multi-row variable data into an email in Flow Designer? And it comes down to, in this case, I use the custom action to send back our multi-row data. I iterated through that data, formatted into a table using standard CSS, output this script step as HTML. In the email, add an email my custom in my action. Here's the output. Drag it into the box, and you're off and running. That's it. That's pretty good. I think that's going to be a wrap. And hope everyone has a great night. And we'll talk to you next time.